Our gospel reading this week in our lectionary comes from the 10th chapter of Matthew again, and it's verses 40 through 42. Jesus says, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous." Jesus is referencing a cultural custom in antiquity of receiving a representative in the same way that you would receive the person themselves. So if a governor or a general were to go to a group of people or go to a community by sending a representative, it was typical and it was customary to provide the same kind of hospitality to that representative that you would have to the governor or the general in this example. It's kind of like how in the show The Crown, the king or the queen will send a duke or a duchess to a region because they can't go themselves, and the people will receive them as if they are the king or the queen, because you're receiving the crown and not the person. We're coming up on an election cycle where there's going to be campaigning. Some has already started. A lot of campaigning doesn't actually happen by the person themselves. So certainly Joe Biden and Donald Trump will do their fair share of showing up at events and talking and campaigning, but their VPs will do that. Other supporters will certainly go and campaign on their behalf. And those crowds will receive that representative as if it were Donald Trump or Joe Biden, just with this year's examples. So that's the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about, which is, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. So Jesus is saying, whoever welcomes me is welcoming the one who sent me. I'm the representative of my Father in heaven, and so, if you show me hospitality, then you're showing my Father hospitality. But then he changes it a little bit, as Jesus often does in his teachings, and he finishes this little piece with, "And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward." Whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple will not lose their reward. For a little context for this, we need to back up to last week's gospel reading. And if we remember in last week's reading, Jesus has these really difficult words about how following him and his message will separate sons and fathers, daughters and mothers. Households will be divided. And he is talking about separating the just and the unjust. Those who know and follow the truth and those who don't. And he finishes that by talking and by saying that In order to really be a disciple, one has to lose their life. They have to take up their cross and to follow him. In a sense, Jesus is saying, for the sake of my message, which is a message of love and life, to be a disciple of that way of love is to become utterly dependent on God. Like a little child is utterly dependent on a parent because they have no standing or power, they have no ability to take care of themselves on their own yet. So this is why in this verse, in verse 42, Jesus is comparing his disciples to children. This is, I think, the radical part of his message. He begins with a normal way of doing things, a customary way of doing things in their culture, and then he changes things up. And he says, if you welcome one of my humble disciples, someone who has likely given up their home in order to travel around and share my message, with so meek a gift as a cup of cold water, you have honored me. Jesus, you have honored me. By doing this, Jesus is leveling the playing field. Because it means that even a peasant, even a homeless youth, even an addict, even someone on SSI or someone living on some other form of social welfare can provide hospitality to the Messiah. He's saying you don't have to throw a great banquet. If you're welcoming a disciple who has made themselves utterly dependent on God in the same way the child does, then you've welcomed me. And it doesn't need to be grand. This gives access to the kingdom to everyone, not just to those who can afford it. Obviously, if we lived this way in our society, we would have a completely different world right now. This might be a different interpretation from what maybe seems obvious to you or to us as we read this. I know it's nice to think about this passage as, if we get to provide a refreshing drink to a child, then we are welcoming Jesus. And I'm not saying that it can't still mean that, because if the Lord sends us a child as his representative, then we are welcoming Jesus in that regard. But this also means that we welcome everyone the same way that we would welcome one of Jesus's early disciples. But here's the other really tricky part. Many of us who are part of the church would probably consider ourselves disciples of Jesus. So where does that leave us? Where are we in the story? If we are disciples, then this passage really isn't necessarily about us or for us. But it does remind us that maybe we need to check our expectations about what we think we are entitled to or what we deserve. We check those expectations at the door. I had a very humbling experience this week. There were some people that were hanging out around the mission in the courtyard. This happens a lot in the summers it raises my level of stress to levels that I don't love, because I kind of have to constantly be on alert and kind of watching out for what's going on. So I went over to check on them and to see if I needed, honestly, if I needed to kick them out. I have to do that a lot, and every time I do, my heart sinks because I feel like I have to choose between enforcing some sort of law that feels unfair and unjust, or offering grace and compassion. It's an internal conflict that is a struggle all the time, to be honest. But there's this young couple. They're pretty new to the neighborhood. I just met them a couple weeks ago. They're very young. And the young woman, she told me that she had been given a bunch of frozen chicken and frozen French fries. And she asked really kindly if she could cook them up in our kitchen, because if she didn't cook them, then they were going to go bad and they wouldn't be able to eat them. So my head told me no, but my heart just, feels for these folks. And so I said yes. There was somebody with them that I knew has a food handler card, and I trusted him, and so I let them in with masks, just two of them, to cook this food up and to give it away to people. So a little while later, I hear a knock on my door, and I look through the people, because I don't ever just answer the door anymore without looking to see who it is. And I see this young woman. I was hoping that she would say that they were done and that I could go over there and lock up and check on things. But instead, as I open the door, she is holding a to-go box that is bursting at the seams with hot food. And this homeless woman was offering me some dinner. And in doing so, she was welcoming Christ into her own life, not the other way around. Her selfless act of generosity showed me the face of Christ in a way that was uncomfortable and unsettling and also healing. This, I think, might be the challenge and the power of this gospel reading for those of us who feel like we're disciples of Jesus. It's easy to put ourselves in the story as the ones who provide the hospitality or the service to another. We think that's our job, and it is. But Matthew is trying to convey something radically different. Give up your life totally. Give up your expectations of what you deserve. And then receive and be received by nothing short of grace. If we are to be Christ's disciples, we are to be like children, completely and utterly dependent on God. That will look a lot of different ways to us over the course of a week, over the course of a year, over the course of our lives. But we are called to give up our life so that we can gain it. Amen.